I want to say something today about a great rock group, the Rolling Stones. Um, Most of these podcasts I make are about poets and people who are great with words. I don't think the Rolling Stones or Mick Jagger, he's the one I think who writes most of the lyrics, comes up to the level of great poetry. But he does write some, or they, sometimes it's not only him, it's Keith Richards and the others, they do sometimes write very powerful words. Um, Jumping Jack Flash comes to mind. Um, I was born with a spike right through my head, but it's all right now. In fact, it's a gas. Jumping Jack Flash, it's a gas, gas, gas. So many others as well. Honky Tonk Women and Gimme Shelter. Like I say, it's not great poetry, but they're very evocative words, and in combination with the music, it's very powerful. It's a very powerful white rendition of the blues. I think the way the Stones are different to most of the other white blues groups is that they really started as a blues tribute group, and they were in England, and they wanted to introduce other English people to the quality of the blues. They had no idea that in America most white people had no idea about what the blues were like either. They thought that in the US everybody appreciated the blues. It was only when they got there that they understood the true situation because of segregation at that time. White people, and especially white kids, knew nothing about the blues. It would be wrong to think that the early Stones were only singing and playing the blues. They also did a lot of pop songs, or would be more precise to say, yes, they started as a blues tribute group, and then when they acquired more fame and more of a following with the teenagers, and especially the teenage women, they started to write some of their own stuff, which was more poppy. Tell me it's off the hook, this kind of thing. Going back to the origin of the Stones, it's all very strange actually. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards come from a nice kind of middle class backwater in the south of England. Jagger was very good at school, very good at sports, very good academically. His father was a teacher. And yeah, there isn't much resemblance really between the Jagger family and the blues people that he later came to represent. As regards Keith Richards, well, I think that probably he was less good academically than Mick, and at that time there used to be a system of grammar schools and secondary modern schools. Everybody would take an exam in England at about 11, or at 11. It was called the 11 plus, and based on the results of that exam, you would go to either the grammar school or the secondary modern school. Grammar school was for the smart kids, and the secondary modern school more for the kind of future electricians and plumbers and people who would take a training. So Mick passed his 11 plus, and I think that Keith probably didn't. He went to the local secondary school. So the two of them really knew each other in the elementary school before that time, and lost track of each other for a long time. It was a great moment of synchronicity, I suppose, when they famously met at Dartford train station. Mick with a handful of Muddy Waters records, Chuck Berry records in his hands, and the envious Keith wanting to know more about where he got them from. And they found that they shared this love of the blues. So they rekindled the old friendship. So nothing more unlikely actually than these two kids from suburban England taking up the blues can be imagined. And yet they did it so well when they got together later with Brian Jones and the others, especially Brian Jones. Or I think that, you know, Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts, they did a great job, but the core of the group was really Jagger, Richards, and Brian Jones. I think Brian Jones was very important in the early days. He was a great player. Wyman has gone on record as saying he was easily the best musician in the group. And they all got together with this love of the blues, and they played around London and got a regular gig at the Marquee Club. The thing about the Stones is that the blues originally was like a homage, and this is why more than any other white blues group, it sounds like the Stones really does blues as black people do the blues. They got so used to really doing a homage to these characters like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters, Little Walter, that it became second nature to them. And even though their background was so different, they really reproduced the blues in a very authentic way. I think more authentically than any other white group. There is a category of blues which I call white blues, which I don't really like. Groups like Aerosmith and sometimes Led Zeppelin are good examples of this, where they kind of reinterpret the blues. Nothing wrong with that. They do it in their own way, but it's not the blues. It's a kind of mixed bag of heavy metal. Well, it's not heavy metal, but there are elements of metal there. It's a heavy rock, and there's some blues. So it's a very white mix, basically. But what Jagger and Richards did, and Jones, was really very authentic, especially in the early days, and that held them in good stead later on when they were making records, and the blues always did sound very authentic. So it was stuff of dreams, I suppose, the course of their success. They first became well known in England and had a #1 record with Little Red Rooster, which was amazing to have a pure blues at #1 in the UK. Was amazing, and they did it very well. Jones's slide guitar, superb. Later on, when they got more popular, all the teeny boppers following them, they started to write their own stuff, and Mick and Keith admit that when they started, all they could do was write ballads, and maybe this was probably the English suburban background coming out, but stuff like Lady Jane and As Tears Go By couldn't be more different than the blues. I think the first strongly blues influenced record they produced, which sounded really authentic and in the right mode, was The Last Time. Great riff, and the song itself is based on the Staple Singers number. There's a bit of confusion and doubt about who wrote the riff, which is probably the most notable thing about that song, especially as it looked forward to so many other great riffs, Satisfaction and all the others, Honky Tonk Women, Jumping Jack Flash. It's clear that Brian plays the riff, although the song, in terms of songwriting credits goes to Jagger and Richards, but Richards has said that he wrote the riff and gave it to Brian. Some people doubt that. For me, I feel that it's a classic Keith riff. Maybe Jones helped write it, maybe they did it together, I don't know, but I can't doubt that Keith's hand is in it because it sounds so similar to so many other great riffs that came later. Not similar, but from the same mind. And, Brian was a great player of the blues, but he never produced any great riffs except possibly this one, if he did have a hand in it. So, looking at the internal evidence of the music, I think it probably came mostly from Keith, and that was the key that opened up the Stones' future riff-based song catalogue, and didn't take long for those other songs I mentioned to follow after the last time. So they took this pure blues which they'd been playing, and then added something to it, their own interest in rock music and other types of music, and a strange hybrid emerged of kind of riff-based blues rock, and that's really what they've played ever since. I think it's very specific to the Stones. It's not like the stuff played by Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin, which I call white blues, and I don't really like. It's very pure blues and very pure rock which comes together, and I think that the moment they brought all these genres together best of all was on Exile on Main Street in 1971-72, when they brought together all these genres of American music, blues and rock and roll and country, and put it all together and added their own touch of their own rock spirit to it, and the results are absolutely amazing, like cornucopia of American inspired music. But it's not just American inspired, they're actually taking the music and developing it in new ways, and a song like Tumbling Dice is quintessentially American. It's blues, it's rock, it's the Rolling Stones really turning out a song which is quintessentially American, even though they're English. In the Stones, of course, you get a lot of the same things that you got in the blues, and there is the same kind of take on women most of the time, where the women are kind of objectified, turned into objects, and compared to cars and things like Start Me Up, she's a mean machine. So yeah, as we go forward, that could be a problem for a lot of people, because you have discussions about equality and so on and so forth. The same people will say to you how important it is to treat men and women in an equal way, and then they'll go off to listen to their rock records, which is full of old style blues type attitudes to women, where they are objectified and seen as easy riders and disposable items. So that's a kind of contradiction in our society, that we think there should be equality, but a lot of the entertainment that we enjoy is a throwback to earlier times and earlier attitudes. I have no easy answer to that, but I just throw it out there as, something which creates contradictions in people. Yeah, so of course the four great Stones albums that appeared in the late 60s and early 70s were Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, and Exile on Main Street. Great sequence of albums. Beggar's Banquet followed the Satanic Majesty's Request, which personally I quite like, but it's many miles away from being the blues or blues influenced. It's the Stones following in the track of the Beatles, as they often did, even with the title of the very fine album Let It Be, that followed Let It Bleed, that followed Let It Be by the Beatles. Of course, Satanic Majesties is like a redoing of Sgt. Pepper and is part of the psychedelic experience of that time. They say that Richards was not so happy with the album, and none of them were really, and they went back to the studio with determination to get back to their blues roots, and with that in mind they hired Jimmy Miller, who produced a new sound for them, which was first evident on the single Jumpin' Jack Flash, which was an amazing song. I know some people say, oh, Bill Wyman came up with the riff, Keith heard him playing it on the piano, so really, you know, it's like, well, he should be credited. Well, maybe he should be credited, but it's not Bill's song. It would have ended in nothing if it had been left to Bill, I think. So it's only because of Keith that the song became Jumpin' Jack Flash. Keith and Mick's great lyrics. Yeah, so after Brian died, and well, he left the group before he died, but after he left the group, the Stones got Mick Taylor, great English blues guitarist, in to take his place, and that in some ways took them on to another level, so that those albums, which I mentioned before, are full of great playing from Mick Taylor. Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street in particular, full of great playing by Mick Taylor, and some people think that is a high point of the Stones. Do I think so? Yes, probably it was. Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street for me are probably the two best albums, and the two albums where it all comes together, all the different influences coming together into a unique hybrid form. So after Mick Taylor decided to leave after Goat's Head Soup, they decided to take Ronnie Wood. I was never really felt that comfortable with Ronnie, really. I think he's a good player. I like him, of course, like everybody likes him. And some people say he kept the Stones together. I don't know if that's all that important, really, if they had fallen apart after Black and Blue. I don't know that we would have missed so much. They continued for another 40 or 50 years, but became a live band. I don't think that we would have missed a lot in terms of the studio material. If I listen to the Stones, I don't listen to a lot after Goat's Head Soup. So yeah, Ronnie, he's a good guy, plays good guitar, especially good on steel guitar, and I think his moment of greatness was on Some Girls, which is a fine album. But he's a little bit too much glam for me. I still think of him as a Rod Stewart guitarist more than a Stones guitarist, and he's good, but never really recapture the blues days of Mick Taylor. Yeah, the way the Stones have developed since Ronnie took over, or since Goat's Head Soup, I think that with the exception of Start Me Up on Tattoo You, it's all pretty forgettable. Die-hard Stones fans will tell you that they like this song or that song from the subsequent albums, but it's like they are producing this material just for die-hard fans. I don't think many ordinary admirers of rock music could tell you anything about the music after the mid-70s. There's some good material there, but it's kind of revisiting old places. The things they did somewhere else better at an earlier time. So, yeah, great band, but kind of redundant for the last 40 or 50 years. Maybe living on their reputation a little bit. That's harsh, but that's how most people see it, and there's probably some truth in that. Yeah, so strange phenomenon, the Rolling Stones coming after the Beatles and following in their tracks, helping continue the British invasion of America and paving the way for all the later white blues rock groups, who, in my opinion, were never as good as the Stones, although sometimes more successful, like Led Zeppelin. We don't know how it's going to finish. They're still doing the live shows right now. They just finished a show in Chicago and going around the States touring. So, yeah, they're all in their mid-70s. Charlie's nearly 80, and they're still doing it. So that's great. That's great testament to how great their music was for a long time. I would say right up to Black and Blue, and even maybe Tattoo You, although there's only really Start Me Up on that which stands out in my opinion. After that, it's just the odd track which is great on their records, on their albums. So the Rolling Stones was one of the first, and now it's one of the last, and the longevity is startling, is amazing. Long may it continue. Hail to the Rolling Stones.